16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning. Hello, hello, hello.
Blah, blah.
Hi, hi.
Your write-in says.
Howdy, howdy.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Hello.
My name's Woody.
Hello.
Hey.
How you doing?
Yeah. How are you?
Yeah. Is not an answer to that question, but I will accept it
It
nonetheless.
is an answer.
I'm
is a
feeling good.
statement.
I'm officially moved.
Yes.
So I'm no longer moving. I am now moved.
Yes.
Past tense.
Yeah.
Very important. So that's good.
Yeah.
Feels good.
We are going to
1,000 boxes in the garage, but it still feels good. It's okay.
I'm excited for the day that we move the podcast to the basement to the couch
Mm-hmm.
so we can just chill.
Yeah. We're going to relocate our pod loft is going to be a pod
Basement.
subfloor. I don't know what to call it. Yes, pod basement.
It's going to be in the flood zone.
The flood zone. The floodplain pod. Yeah. We moved my couch down there, and now we have got a cool chill space, and we're going to start recording down there. It's going to be nice. I think it's going to be like quieter. We aren't going to hear as many lawnmowers and leaf blowers.
Honestly.
Everything that kind of tends to invade our podcast when we host it here in this office. But
Here's what
Yeah.
happens. Can I just tell you?
yeah, please.
I asked you to turn on the nice lights because you like your cool lights in here, and I immediately start yawning because it's so calming.
Yeah, I have colored lights in here, and it feels...
and it's just like warm enough, and they're not like super
It's a little sleepy.
like intense.
I've got this Edison bulb, which is very glowy. And
yeah,
looks
but
kind
it's
of
like
a
behind the
nightlight.
goldfish, so it's just like an aura, like of
A calming
goldfish
aura.
light. Yeah,
And we've got purple and like blue-green.
tealy. Yeah, it's just it's a very nice feeling.
It's a chill space.
And now I just yawn, so I'm just gonna sit back and let you take this one,
Oh, okay.
and I'll see you at the end.
Well, this week we are talking about falling down rabbit holes. And I kind of picked this one because it's a sort of form of self-education. Kind of, sort of. Also, maybe
For some people, a little too much.
addiction. Yeah. So it's a kind of interesting thing. It walks this very fine line between I learned a lot of cool stuff and I got sucked into a social media black hole for half the day. But it can be a kind of form of self-learning. So that's sort of the angle from which I wanted to approach it. But we'll talk about good and bad and different approaches and where this kind of thing can go.
I cry.
And maybe a little bit about why we fall into rabbit holes. In case we're wondering where that phrase comes from, do you want to talk a little bit about the etymology of just that phrase, like down the rabbit hole? Or so the phrase originally traces back to
Alice's Adventure in Wonderland.
Yeah.
I actually, as soon as we were talking about it, I felt like at a moment I was like, do I know why? And then I was like, duh. Like it happened very quickly in my head. But it's an 1865 novel by English author Lewis Carroll. And it's about a young girl named Alice who falls through a literal rabbit hole into a subterranean fantasy world populated by all sorts of creatures.
Yeah.
And so in this context, and for some time after the publication of Alice, the phrase meant we wound up somewhere psychedelically strange.
Spooky, weird, kind of anthropomorphic animal kind of stuff. That the original usage was falling into a world where reality is bent or something. Right.
Like Otherworld, the place in Columbus we went to.
There's an art installation near Columbus called Otherworld, and it's just kind of like a lot of blacklit, spooky, otherworldly, obviously strange stuff that is kind of art but kind of interactive. Anyway, yes.
But that's the sort of thing that you would have originally fallen down a rabbit hole towards, or like what the phrase would have meant originally.
Yeah, I think it just carries different connotations now.
Well, Lewis Carroll didn't mean like, you know.
He didn't mean getting sucked into Pinterest for 5 hours.
Well, also, the one article that I read to you, which we'll include in the show notes, was talking about how falling into a rabbit hole really isn't all that deep. And how they're only like...
yeah, rabbit holes are not literal rabbit holes.
They're like just kind of
shallow.
Like, shallow,
and
but
uninteresting.
Like sadly angled. And they're usually marked by like dead grass and like, you know, other lawn things that they've like pulled together for the...
It wasn't a very flattering image of rabbit holes.
But in our terms... it's obviously kind of expanded to include a general sense of becoming engrossed in something. And it's to a point that you're normally completely distracted by it.
Yeah.
So much deeper than an actual rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, you're an ant.
Oh, yeah. I guess I would just say also broad, because you can kind of meander all over the place when you fall down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, but sometimes you get into some very specific things once you've...
No, that's what I'm saying.
You just kind of take
can
different...
be both deep and broad, I guess I would say. But anyway, so I was trying to kind of find a little bit about the psychology behind rabbit holes, why we tend to find ourselves getting sucked into things, or why we go searching for rabbit holes, or that kind of stuff. And there's not a lot that I found directly about people talking about rabbit holes. There is a kind of correlation between rabbit holes and mental health, but it's kind of weird because what I was finding is that, I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit about social media later, but most of what I was finding was articles about people falling down social media rabbit holes and how that's kind of bad for your brain and your psyche and whatnot. But I kind of wanted to find a little bit more about the not necessarily so bad side of rabbit holes, because you can learn a lot, but we'll get there. So one thing that I did find on the psychology side was that it's obviously, in our experience anyway, linked to procrastination.
Directly for me. Would you like me to chime in now?
Yeah, sure.
It is only ever completely a distraction method.
Yeah. So,
but to be fair, sometimes I don't go searching.
Right.
Like for the thing that I fall into. It just happens very naturally.
Yeah. I think maybe that's actually an interesting distinction in the psychology of it, whether it's intentional or unintentional.
I would say most for me are unintentional. Yeah, it's like a weird conversation that I was like, let me check this out. And then 35 minutes later, I'm into the most specific sort of, research about something I really don't need to know.
Yeah, I think unintentional rabbit holes are the ones closely linked to procrastination. That tends to happen. What?
I was thinking about the rabbit hole that I fell down when Taylor Swift released her new album and about that song for her house.
Oh, yeah.
And then we fell into like that oil tycoon's wife research and then about her actual house. It was a lot.
Yeah.
But it was in those, same kind of thing. I was just, encouraged to go find this information.
The unintentional stuff, it tends to happen when we're kind of trying to avoid really important tasks. That has to do with, that's very closely linked to reasons for procrastination. There's a lot of research that says we procrastinate more over tasks we deem to be really important. They tend to require more effort to complete, so we put off the hard stuff is basically the gist of that.
True.
But other things that can tend to cause that situation of falling into random unrelated stuff is just like fear of evaluation, abstract goals. We're going to be more likely to go diving into rabbit holes when we don't have clearly defined goals for ourselves and whatever it is that we're doing. Distant rewards, indecisiveness, and decision fatigue, and perfectionism, and a whole bunch of other factors. So all of those things are at work when we find ourselves randomly scrolling through Twitter instead of doing the thing that we're supposed to be and need to be doing. Mm-hmm. But like I said, I do kind of think that like a lot of that research I found was treating it as this bad thing, but I do think it can be a good thing because you can learn a lot of weird and interesting stuff when you allow your brain to just sort of soak up everything that it can possibly find without necessarily having a direction or an outcome that you've anticipated. I would say that almost every episode of this podcast is sort of like the product of falling down rabbit holes, because we just kind of, we pick a vague topic and then we just go falling through the internet, finding everything that we can research-wise.
About that thing.
Right. So, that results in us learning stuff and hopefully our listeners learning some things about this stuff. So it's kind of a positive spin on rabbit holes. So I was kind of wondering why I wasn't finding a lot of psychology related research about rabbit holes, and it's probably because there are other terms for it that sound more positive than falling down. A fall is a sort of accidental thing and you fall into a dark place, but if you just call it something else, but it's a somewhat similar process, then you can find more research. So I actually ended up looking up some stuff about the concept of flow, which is a kind of pop psychology term for being in the zone, being in a mental state where you're fully immersed and feeling sort of energized, focused, fully involved in something, and you usually enjoy that process. So it's characterized by complete absorption in what one does, and it usually results in a transformation of a sense of time. So you can see where that description is very similar to falling down a rabbit hole, except that we use one to mean usually a bad thing when we're distracted, and one to mean usually a good thing when we're productive. So
Sure.
They might be flip sides of the same kind of psychological response to stimuli. I don't know. I'm kind of interested in this now, but I just think a lot of the kind of signs of what people call flow state, like a couple examples, like intense focus, concentration on a present moment, merging of action and awareness, loss of reflective self-consciousness, sense of personal control or agency over the situation, distortion of temporal experience, feeling so engrossed in the experience that other needs become negligible. All of that is just kind of a nice way of saying you've fallen down a rabbit hole, I think.
And put off doing whatever you really need to do.
Right. Because, I mean, a flow state in the context of, it happens like in the tech world, people talk about this a lot. When you're coding, you get into a flow state while you're kind of coding on something, but it can be kind of like you've shut out all other things in your life for a brief period of time when you're that hyper focused on something. So anyway, I just thought it was kind of interesting to not be able to find a whole lot in terms of the psychological research when you call it
that, yeah.
falling down a rabbit hole, because people just associate that with kind of mindlessness, I think.
It's not productive, basically, is what they're saying.
Yeah, but I just think there are examples of it being productive.
Oh, I'm just saying that in that case, they would probably argue that
absolutely.
That sort of phrasing is leaning towards not.
So we're going to verge a little bit here into kind of more nefarious applications of this concept. And I'm going to kind of get into it by diving into one of the most famous pop cultural references to this, The Matrix, the movie. It's one of the most famous uses of this concept. It's like this sort of dystopian moment in which this character Morpheus is offering Neo a red pill. He's kind of in a simulation in the movie. His sort of brain is attached to a computer simulation, essentially. And he says, "You stay in Wonderland and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes." And this particular phrase actually has or like situation in the movie has birthed this whole corner of the weird internet and malicious internet. There's actually a term called red pillars that kind of basically misogynists use to describe themselves as having been freed from the illusion that men are dominant in society, and they're like, "Oh yes, I've taken the red pill and I've woken up to the fact that women really are kind of tyrannical over men."
Oh boy.
Yeah, which is a whole
take I wasn't
like
expecting.
I said, there are many corners of the internet involved in this conversation, and most of them are bad.
You mean like when I tried to find QAnon's website?
Does QAnon have a website?
I don't know.
That came up
sounded
tonight.
like such a boomer.
That
was like straight boomer vibes. I was like, but where do they get their info out?
Well, so we're going to talk about conspiracy theories, but that's kind of one appearance in the pop culture context of rabbit holes.
I'm so mad.
And just like everyday social media consumption is another kind of use of this term that has gained popularity. Because social media, it's basically designed to suck you into rabbit holes.
To ruin you.
Right. There's research that suggests that something like using Facebook is similar to being addicted to cocaine. So like it has to do with essentially has to do with the dopamine hit that you get from seeing that
like your stuff,
right? Seeing that you're getting feedback on your narcissistic sharing.
We are
of
the
your
worst
own.
Dogs on the internet.
Yeah, it's like when you. What was that the statistic I read you that people normally in conversation talk about themselves 30 to 40% of the time,
and online it's
on
80%,
social media it's 80% of the time people are talking about themselves. So it's just this narcissistic, weird self-immolation because your brain loves the dopamine hit of getting a notification that somebody commented on your photo, and you just scroll forever to get that dopamine hit. But I mean, you and I also talked about like YouTube is a good example, like the up next feature when you watch a video and then it auto suggests that you watch another one and then another one.
Well, Netflix does that for a while as well, and then it checks in and it's like, "Are you there?
You still
Are
there?
you still there?"
It's kind of that concept of the infinite scroll, though. So like feeds like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok, all of them rely on just being able to scroll forever. And more content coming up.
This line that you had struck me because I remember when I first got Instagram, I was about to graduate college, so 2012, 2011. I remember having so few people that I followed that I could get to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how few people I had, was that I would get to the end and be like, okay, is that all?
Now I'm done.
Yeah, like, because people were posting so infrequently.
Yeah. I can't imagine
And because
that.
I only had so many people.
Can you imagine getting to the end of your Twitter feed? Can you imagine that?
I would welcome it today.
Yeah.
Twitter used to be my favorite place to go, and now it's my worst enemy.
Yeah, for any younger listeners, you used to be able to just reach the end of the scrolling in most of these apps that have become so popular. Like, you would just scroll for 10 minutes and then there would be nothing more to see.
And then you put it down and you did something outside.
Right. You were a productive member of society for a little
Then you went
bit.
outside and played. I'm just kidding. I really didn't. I probably just refreshed it and was like, please give me more.
Another one that is maybe a little less nefarious is a tool that we've used to do a lot of research for the show, and that's Wikipedia. You can kind of get into a hyperlink infinite chain of research when you're looking stuff up.
It's probably one of my go-to places for rabbit hole kind of work.
Mm-hmm. Wikipedia...
I said rabbit nest. When I go to my rabbit nest.
A rabbit nest.
And I research. And I hang out with Thumper. Okay.
I think you and I both know, and our generation in general knows, to be sort of skeptical of the truthfulness of Wikipedia
at all times.
Freedom
there.
Because it can kind of be, it can be edited by anyone, and when you democratize information like that, you can introduce all kinds of errors, but it is a good jumping off point for basically everything. So you could... the way that we get lost in Wikipedia is we look up probably Wikipedia to start with when we're researching episode topics, and then we look at citations in that article, and
then go from there.
Right, and we start jumping off into the original sources that made that Wikipedia entry. So it's very easy, and then those sources lead to other sources, and on forever. So it's another corner of the internet where you can pretty quickly find yourself just going and going and going and not knowing when to stop. Another sort of pop culture, and this is going to be kind of your area of expertise, I think, but another sort of area of pop culture where falling down rabbit holes becomes a kind of frequently used phrase is when people are talking about conspiracy theories, particularly those that are fueled by the internet, but not just those ones. But yeah.
I'm going to start this with a quote that I found. It's from a New York Times article by Kevin Roose, because I like this as a beginning for talking about conspiracy theories. He says, quote, "Uncertainty always breeds distrust, and in the age of social media, authority is held by people who can effectively get their message out, even if those messages are false or misleading." Mm-hmm. And that's directly building on what you were saying about what we get from social media, as far as never getting to the end of a feed means that we are oftentimes suggested something that the algorithm has decided to put in our face to see if it's something we interact with, so it's kind of got some deep roots at times. 6 months ago, I would have been pumped to talk about conspiracy theories, and today I'm just mad. I can't find QAnon's website. For starters,
I don't want to know.
I can't find their YouTube channel. I can't find their Twitter.
Well, that's because
I don't know where they're getting the information.
No, but that's part of the problem with it, right? Is that it's a decentralized web of weird...
I'm just mad.
I would say observations.
And I'm 30, so I'm confused.
Well, it's a web of weird observations and opinions and people thinking they're finding connections that don't really exist.
So right now, I'm not really all that happy with conspiracy theories because some of my students are currently on a tangent that Helen Keller isn't real. And I even tried to Google it before we got on here, and I can't find the TikToks that they're referencing, so I don't know if they're just messing with me to get me fired up.
What do you mean Helen Keller isn't real?
They are telling me that she couldn't have possibly existed because someone who is blind and deaf cannot learn.
Okay, so they're saying
that she can't write books.
Right.
And that they're
saying that the person we think Helen Keller was is not really that. Okay.
And so, of course,
that's a weird one.
I go into the historical, importance of Helen Keller and why the Nazis burned her books and things like that. And they were just like, yeah. So it's like, even though I had the information, they were still like, well, I'm going to believe, whatever I've read somewhere less credible. Which leads me to me also citing TikTok.
Okay. TikTok is another really good example of that infinite scroll addiction rabbit hole phenomenon.
We got TikTok as a joke in the heart of quarantine because Twitter just wasn't doing it. And on TikTok, I found this is a great resource. And I will say there are some great resources on TikTok. I have found some really cool educators and things like that. But this young woman's name is Abby Richards, and she is at Tofology. Tofology?
I don't know.
Tofology at Tofology. There we go. And she created a conspiracy chart, and it is so well done. So I'm going to include it in our notes, but I'm just going to talk about it because I think that understanding the levels of conspiracy theories are really important. So it's an inverted pyramid, and basically it starts like this. The bottom are things that have actually happened. So like MK Ultra, the big tobacco lying about cancer, NSA mass surveillance, like things that we know to be fact. Okay? So that's where it starts. So they're weird things, right? Like MK Ultra is a weird thing, and it's very fascinating, but like we know it to be real. So from there, working our way up, we move up across what she has noted as a speculation line into a section that she calls, quote, "we have questions." So these are things like JFK's assassination, Epstein didn't kill himself, the Denver airport and Area 51.
Oh, you and I have talked about the Denver airport.
Yeah.
Because we fell down another rabbit hole.
That was when we fell
about
down.
Freemasons, actually.
And that's part of the Denver airport as well. So, like, these are all things that we can have questions about, and that's okay. Because it's not like, I mean, the Epstein stuff is problematic, but these other things, like the Denver airport and its runways being in the shape of a swastika is not great design, but it's a fact of the airport. Okay. So these things, fine. These are just speculations. Moving on. The middle of this pyramid is where she has noted it as leaving reality, and these are still conspiracies that are unequivocally false, but are still mostly harmless. So we're not losing anything by diving into Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and alien abductions and Stonehenge and is Elvis alive and crop circles. We've got a lot of places to go. But does that make sense? Like, we're not losing anything by these things, and they're not directly impacting us as humans.
For the most part, I would believe that's true, yeah.
Do you know something about alien abductions that I don't know?
No, it's more like, I don't know, people who, like, really have lost a lot of time in their lives to hunting for Bigfoot.
Right, but harmless is in terms is like it's not hateful or ignorant.
Fair,
let's say.
Fair. It's more
or
just
based in hate. I guess
a fun
I should say.
pastime.
Yeah, so it's like something that you do to So like maybe Elvis was alive in Cuba or somewhere in South. Like who knows? He's got to be dead by now. Anyways, from that point though, this pyramid. When we go up the next step, these are where things get really bad. So this is where she calls it an area of science denial. And it's a range where it's not only dangerous for yourself, but it's also dangerous to others to believe these conspiracy theories. So these are things like the dinosaurs aren't real, chemtrails, essential oils will heal all things, anti-vaxxers, global warming isn't real, jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams. Yeah, that's the 9/11 conspiracy theory.
9/11 conspiracies.
So this is where we get into a place where it's really complicated. And it's not safe to like
propagate them,
buy into these as absolute fact. Are you with me still?
Yeah, I mean it's getting scary, but yeah.
Okay, well we're not there yet. Okay. But the top, this is what she calls, and I love this so much, the anti-Semitic point of no return.
Oh, okay.
This is a group essentially where the people believe that the world is ruled by supreme shadow elites. And once you believe one of these, most of them come with it. And she also notes, like on her chart, we need to seek help. Like when we're at this point, we got to go. Okay. So these are people that deny that the Holocaust ever happened. These are Pizzagate fanatics right now. These are flat earthers. These are people that believe that we are ran by reptilian overlords. This is where QAnon goes. This is deep state.
I remember the reptilian overlord
I
thing.
know. That one feels so long ago.
Wasn't that around like the last election?
Yes.
Okay.
And then also Sandy Hook is on here at this level.
That it was fake or something.
And that they hired crisis actors to be the...
Just insane to me.
So all of these things...
People have gotten sued for that now. Wasn't that an Alex Jones one?
Oh, yeah. He was on my list and I left him off.
I really can't remember. He's a very big conspiracy theory
He's
propagator.
Friends, yeah.
But I think he might have gotten sued by parents of Sandy Hook victims because he was propagating conspiracy theory that it didn't happen, basically. I think that was him. Yeah.
So
anyway.
That level is really bad. And that scares me because that's where I feel like a lot of my social media is talking. And it's people that are like, well, if you haven't looked into it, then you just aren't aware yet, but someday you'll see. And I'm like, scroll, hide. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So that's her whole chart. That's how she's broken them down.
Yeah. So why is, especially with the upper levels, why is this dangerous?
So this is actually from, let me double check my sources here. It's actually from the addictioncenter.com, this information that's coming up. So people become addicted to conspiracy theories, and the Addiction Center has quoted it, or has defined it as saying, quote, conspiracy theory addiction is a behavioral addiction that can have a hidden impact on the way you perceive events and has been linked to having more negative attitudes. Rather than helping one cope with their negative feelings, the belief in conspiracy theories can create a cycle of distrust and disempowerment. As a person encounters different sources, it is important to be able to analyze the information and distinguish between false theories and real threats. Mm-hmm. And so people that are suffering from conspiracy theory addictions might feel a loss of control, anxious, fearful, a need to make sense of complex topics, low self-esteem, an urge to make connections, the belief in the paranormal, a sense of not belonging. They might feel isolated, they feel alienated, they're disengaged, or, just not part of society.
That's exactly what some of the
side effects of social media
addiction. Yeah.
That's why I thought it was so interesting you mentioned that, because I was like, same. Mm-hmm. And so the Addiction Center has basically stated that people believe conspiracy theories for 3 reasons. 1 is a need for understanding and consistency. So right now, that makes total sense. Mm-hmm. Because the world is upside down. 2, a need for control. Again, the world is upside down. Yeah. And 3, a need to belong or feel special. Again, the world is upside down. So it makes total sense why this is happening at the rate of which I think we can all agree that it's currently just out of this control. Mm-hmm. But this addiction, it needs help. And so the Addiction Center actually suggests that these people seek help to talk to someone to try to work through it, as a way to say, hey, you are worth something. We do not have to make these very, very complex things simple, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's very damaging. And so the damage of conspiracy theories is essentially just that. Not trusting the media is what has led the U.S. to the point, like I said earlier, that I currently see it to be. And we both, I would think I can group you in, we love the media. We love to read newspapers, but we have to go into them knowing their bias and understanding that anytime that we are reading something, that we have to understand that there's a lens attached to it somewhere.
Yeah, you and I have had a lot of discussions like this, but I think this is generally true of both traditional media, social media. This idea that there is an unbiased way of reporting out there is, I just think, misguided. Every human
has a bias.
We are human. Part of our human identity means that we have biases, whether or not we choose to acknowledge them, mm-hmm. or whether or not we can identify them in any situation. That doesn't matter. They are still, in fact, there. Biases exist. There is no such thing as an unbiased human, which, it's not a bad thing. We just need to be aware of our biases and articulate them when it's appropriate to do so. But also, I think we need to be comfortable with embracing the idea that there's no such thing as an unbiased mm-hmm. person, and therefore there's no such thing as unbiased reporting of events.
And I think that anytime you have to be able to look at someone and be like, okay, what is their experience and what has it shown them and mm-hmm. what has their lived world, what is that to them? And so can I compare to that? And not that you have to, but those are important factors in hearing from someone, like the news or whatever. If we're talking about, especially the people that have been in the news for commentating, or what's the word we want to use for the debates? Is that it's not commentating. Moderating. So the people that are moderators for the debates, we've heard all about them, but they have a bias. So we have to look at this and say, okay, this is a woman moderator. So what does she bring to the table and what's her experience? Mm-hmm. The first guy, Chris Matthews, what does he bring to it? Mm-hmm. And I think we just have to do that. And if we aren't doing that every single time we're reading something, then we're not digesting it in the best way possible.
Sure. Yeah. I think we need to just admit to ourselves that our especially political opinions, but any opinion that is derived from a kind of public forum, those opinions are to some extent just a matter of which biases we prefer. You know, it's
For sure.
which ones do I more strongly identify with, whatever. But I think we need to kind of disabuse ourselves of the notion that oh, well, you should be unbiased. Oh, we need to remove bias.
Right. We can't.
I would rather not have somebody who is feigning neutrality, either in the classroom or in the news media or wherever it is. It's just like, I would rather not have someone who is kind of fake neutral, because I know they're not really neutral.
Yeah, and they're just
I would rather just know what somebody thinks and then be able to analyze stuff that I hear from them, knowing a little more about their biases, not even just biases, but their experience. I would rather, just go into things knowing transparently what somebody really thinks, because I feel like that's a kind of more honest approach to communication in general.
I wrote in the notes, just as a little reminder, but essentially what I believe is that so many people were home in quarantine that they fell down too many rabbit holes, and they didn't do any actual reasonable research to counterbalance what they were reading or watching. And so I even added, and if you know me, you know that I love conspiracy theories. I love facts. I love trivia. So like conspiracy theories are right up my alley. But I today just find them to be so dangerous because people aren't capable, most of them, it seems, of being able to situate what they've learned into reality into any sort of meaningful way. Like, it's fun. I love them just as much as the next person. We have fallen down so many good ones.
Yeah, you can enjoy them, but you sometimes have to recognize that you're enjoying them as fiction, which is the problem of conspiracy theories today.
And at the end of that Wikipedia page, I'm going to close my phone and I'm just going to be like, wow, that was a lot. And it's not going to do anything else in my life except for me to be like, oh, do you remember when we read, like, it's not going to somehow alter my worldview? Like, I don't know. It's not doing those things because I'm able to place it back into the reality, which is...
Yeah, I think it's that last step of repositioning conspiracy theories within a broader scheme of fact and fiction that some people are becoming incapable of doing in our internet-driven world, where we've democratized communication to the point where anybody with an opinion can say anything that might spread like wildfire over the face of the planet, which if you're using that power for good, cool. But if you're using it to, foment hate and discord, and that's a real problem. I just think. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, again, you just have to know where to draw the line to be like, oh, this is fascinating. I wonder if the mob did kill JFK, and then you move on to the next thing, which is laundry or whatever.
Okay. Laundry, lots and lots of laundry.
Lots of laundry. Tell me some recent rabbit holes you've fallen into.
Oh yeah, just to give examples of how pervasive this phenomenon is. I mean, this is just in the last couple days and weeks. Back to the idea of like the positive sort of enlightening and interesting rabbit hole take, the one that is maybe more related to flow and not so negative in its activity. I tend to fall down rabbit holes when I'm researching technology and like programming related questions. So I'll end up 3 hours later and 80 browser tabs open on some question that I'm trying to figure out, and I find it in some obscure post on Stack Overflow. A lot of working in technology is Googling and just forever until you find, this little nugget of information buried somewhere on the internet. But I think that kind of falling down a rabbit hole has been, for me, very productive because I've learned a lot about becoming a better software developer that way. We actually talked about this one on the podcast, but this weird cult, NXIVM.
And you have an update for this week.
Oh yeah, the founder of it was just sentenced to life in prison.
Oh, like 120 years.
A big life sentence in prison.
But we have fallen very deep into the NXIVM.
Well, we didn't watch all of The Vow. It's a little bit heavy and weird, but I really just kind of found it because that one actress that I used to follow. But that's definitely a rabbit hole for sure. Big one. We're listening to a podcast called Missing in Alaska. And is that one of yours?
That was
too?
on my list too. No,
no, it's okay. And we can talk about it if you want, but
Go ahead.
It's not exactly conspiracy theories. It's an investigative journalist researching the death of some politicians in a small plane crash in Alaska in the 70s, and it's conspiracy theory adjacent because there are a lot of just really strange details of that case. Like things were never investigated in great detail.
Well, and it leaves you in a place that you're kind of forced to use like these little bits to create the theories, like of how it happened and why it happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it is along the lines for sure of a conspiracy theory, because then you're like, oh, was it this, or could it have been this? Like you're trying to go through the political motivation or whatever. Personal.
And that podcast is addicting, and partly I think because it's unfinished. You know, there's no answer to it, so it's gotten us hooked now because it's presented all of these weird details and facts and figures and trying to tie together webs of intrigue and mystery here and there. And it's Washington, D.C. and New Orleans and Alaska and Tucson, Arizona, the mafia and all kinds of, well, the mob at least. It's just like, just all kinds of threads in every direction. And it's very easy to fall into the trap of like, oh, another little cool fact. Oh, another little cool fact. I wonder how they're connected.
Yeah.
You and I talked about the Masons. We were just when we were coming up with ideas for this podcast, we were kind of coming up with a topic list to see if we felt like we could talk about education related stuff long enough to actually make a go of it and make a podcast. And but somehow on that car trip where we were coming up with those initial ideas for this, we fell down a really big rabbit hole of involving Masons.
Yeah,
Masons.
That's a deep one.
It's actually still on our topic list because there's some kind of interesting like
education sort of
culture, like initiation into a culture related stuff and some weird teachings. Oh, maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to be hugely offensive to any of the Masons listening to our podcast, but there's just a lot to talk about there, so we'll get to that. But anyway,
welcome.
Yeah, but welcome.
And thank you for listening to us.
I fell down a rabbit hole. I kind of judge whether or not it's a rabbit hole by how many browser tabs it requires to research. And when I was looking for models for my 3D printer that I got, I fell down a very deep rabbit hole of
what you could print.
Everything.
Sure.
I looked up everything possible to print, I'm pretty sure.
Boy.
But then I just, one other just thing that's related to my work is that when I'm doing web design and development, rabbit holes come up in that context because clients sometimes request stuff that is not necessarily good user experience design because they want to create addiction. They want to have infinite scroll, whatever. They want you to just keep going and going and going and suck you down into whatever it is they're presenting to you or selling to you or whatever. So there's an awareness of this phenomenon for sure in companies that are trying to sell you things, especially on the internet. So I just think that's kind of another interesting thing. I mean, it ends up in kind of bad, overwhelming user interfaces sometimes, but it is often requested because people acknowledge the power of being able to bring somebody into your little world. What about you?
I last week had my students watch the 25-minute video about all the possible ways that Edgar Allan Poe might have died.
Oh, that's fun.
So that's something that I've recently fallen into.
Yeah, I know. You and I watched that one video together.
Yeah.
It was kind of there are a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, there are. And so there's a rabbit hole you could fall down really quickly because there's so much unknown about Poe. But my students really liked it. So
that's cool.
They must be a victim of the rabbit hole as well. And this is like edges on conspiracy theories, but I love the crown, like the British crown. So like all of the things related to like Princess Diana and like the family and some of their political stuff, and I don't know, that's when I can really get into like how Queen Elizabeth became queen, like all that type of stuff. So that definitely verges on conspiracy pretty quickly.
Princess Di was like one of the first kind of conspiracy theories I remember being exposed to as a kid.
For sure.
About how she died.
So in that, like I said, it does edge on conspiracy just because of the nature of a lot of that. But it is a, like before I know I'm like 3 Mountbattens deep, and I'm like, how did I get here? And the other one, and this isn't something I've done super recently, but it is something that I cover with my students, is I have them tell me all the things that they think they know about Hitler, because so many of the facts of Hitler are really just kind of deep, misguided truths or conspiracy theories sort of surrounding him, like if he really died in the bunker, like all that kind of stuff. And so it's always really interesting for them to be like, the History Channel said that he's with the alien or whatever, so.
I'm sorry, what? He's with
of course, the History Channel takes everything to the aliens.
To the aliens.
But they there's I mean, that's also according to high schoolers who just want to talk about aliens, probably. But
Wow.
it is always an interesting way to start the Hitler conversation, because in order to teach the Holocaust effectively, you sort of need to understand him as a leader. And a lot of people think they know a lot of things about Hitler, and they definitely do also edge on conspiracy, but it's always interesting to hear what the kids know, just from what, their 15 or 16 years experience. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a fun one to start with, like the theories around him not going to art school and like what that did to him. Like there's just, it's kind of deep stuff. So those are a few, and those are a couple I use in my classroom, obviously, but still things that I can, fall into.
Neat.
Well, they're not all bad. I think that's important to
Yeah.
remind everyone. We can learn from them. We have to make them productive. We might need to leave them and be like, what just happened? But also, we have to be able to firmly root them in something as well.
And this is the problem with rabbit holes too, is that sometimes sometimes conspiracy theories turn out to be true, because sometimes there are actual conspiracies. It doesn't even have to be a theory; it can be an actual conspiracy. So I think it's the same case with rabbit holes. Is that sometimes they can be productive because you've set out to maybe learn one thing and you end up learning 500 things because you just didn't stop.
Well, I think part of what probably propels some people into rabbit holes and going to so deep into rabbit holes is that they didn't learn what they thought they would. So it might just be a continuation of a search for the truth that they already,
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, speaking of random facts that finding on the internet when you
last
fall down
week's
a rabbit
question.
hole. Yeah, fill in the blank. Do you want to go ahead and read it?
Yeah. Last week's question was October 12th is Columbus Day, a day where the U.S. celebrates Columbus discovering North America, which he didn't. So, who actually discovered North America 500 years prior to Columbus claiming to have found it in 1492?
That was Leif Erikson.
It was Leif Erikson.
Yeah. All right, this week's
There's
question.
a rabbit hole you could find.
Oh, yeah.
Fall down. Leif Erikson, just in general.
Fall down a Leif Erikson rabbit hole.
I don't recommend it. This week.
Yeah. This week is related to the title of this episode, Curiouser and Curiouser, and also just has to do with the sort of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Alice in Wonderland topic in general. I did not know this, but I learned.
Well, you put it in the show notes, and I was like, yoink. That's the question.
Yeah. So the question is, what was Lewis Carroll's real name? Because Lewis Carroll, as it turns out, is a pen name, and I did not know that. So what was his real name?
I don't know if Lewis Carroll is better than this. I wonder what he was going for.
I wish I knew.
I'll have to look.
Maybe he just wanted to be anonymous.
Maybe he just
So we're gonna have to fall down a rabbit hole about that.
Okay, what'd you learn this week? These last 2 weeks, I suppose.
Yeah. I think I've probably mentioned it before, but one of my favorite podcasts to listen to is called 20,000 Hertz. It's about sound of all sorts, music, sound, just our audio kind of environment. It's been really fun to listen to, kind of catch up on that podcast as we've been driving back and forth and moving things here and there. But one of the recent episodes of the show is about a piece of music called Dies Irae, and it's a chant, a very old chant, in fact, that has made its way into all kinds of pop cultural references. I mean, even less like pop cultural. It shows up in all kinds of references in classical music. But this episode talked about, definitely listen to the episode because it's really cool. You get to kind of listen to snippets of all sorts of film scores. There's a lot of John Williams in it. But this little this chant, or at least especially the first four notes of it, da 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 da, that's like, those are the tones of it. Those first four notes at least show up in all kinds of movie scores and TV scores and all kinds of stuff, but just a couple of ones where it did show up that most of these were listed in the podcast, but some of them are different from other sources. But it appears in Citizen Kane, the main theme to that. It's a Wonderful Life, and they played that clip where it shows up in the movie and the podcast, and that was really fun. It's one of my favorite Christmas kind of movies. It shows up in Star Wars when Luke's aunt and uncle are killed. It shows up in The Lion King, Frozen. We've been singing Frozen because it's now stuck in our heads.
I've been singing Rent.
Into the Unknown. Yeah, it shows up in this line in Rent. He actually just says Dies Irae, Dies Irae. Poltergeist was another one. The Exorcist and The Shining. It was just kind of a sample of the...
trying to work my way through Frozen, The Lion King, Rent, Poltergeist.
It goes a lot of different directions. But yeah.
It's a Wonderful Life. The Shining.
So it's associated with, it's kind of a funeral, it's like a funeral. It started being used in funeral masses, but then it kind of got secularized at a certain point.
So here we are.
Yeah. So it shows up tons of places, but especially those kind of related to or adjacent to a death of a character or a death, a funeral or something like that. So anyway, it was a really cool episode. I really liked it. But yeah, that's what I learned. What did you learn?
I didn't learn anything.
Oh, okay.
That's it. That's the end of the podcast.
Okay, the end. Bye.
I am going to do the annoying thing because everyone is tired of this right now. But I feel it is my duty to do this. I'm going to use my learning time to say that we voted early in person.
Mm-hmm.
And that because my brain is mush, I'm just going to focus on this. We have to go out and vote. On the day that you're listening to this, if you're listening to this on the day it drops on Thursday, that means that you will have from now until Tuesday to get it done. I know you're tired of being told. I know I'm tired of it popping up on all my feeds and my social media and this doom scrolling. Mm-hmm. It's everywhere. But a good friend of ours was telling us that she had stood in line in Cleveland for more than an hour just for that chance.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean,
not everyone...
People are waiting in line for hours and
not
hours.
everyone is that lucky, right? Is where I was going.
An hour was lucky.
Yeah,
basically.
And so we were very blessed to not live in such a highly populated county as her. But we had like 10 minutes, so it was easy. But my thing is this. It's taking a long time, even for the early voters, which is not common. And so that means that on that Tuesday, the voting, actually the election day, they will probably not be able to get everyone through in the way that they've been able to in the past because we're seeing record numbers of turnout, which is incredible. But that also means you just got to go do it. You got to go stand in line. You got to drive your grandma or whoever. Wear your mask. Stay away from everybody else. Use your hand sanitizer. Okay? Be safe. But you got to get out and do it. And at this point, especially in Ohio, like we are not mailing them. You've got to get your booty in there because there is no time.
Yeah, I would, especially with what's happening with some court cases around the country right now, I think we're past the point of being able to reliably trust our mail-in ballots to get there and get counted. So if you can, please do go vote in person, I think I would say at this point. But make sure you do that before next Tuesday.
So make RBG proud, make Leslie Knope proud. Make all of America proud by doing your duty. And we will see you for the first episode post-election, which who knows what that could even be.
Yep.
But we'll be here, hopefully.
We'll be here in some form.
Probably.
Some part of us will be here.
Our ghost appears now.
All right.
We'll see you then.
Sounds good. Bye.
Bye.
Listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1.
We're trying to grow our audience, so please check us out at 16to1.com, all spelled out, and tell your friends about the show.
On our website, you can find links to follow us on social media, an archive of all our old episodes, and a contact form where you can get in touch.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. I hate SpongeBob.